3 decisions on the path of imaginative cognition: loneliness, fear, dread. The spiritual world can be entered through 3 portals: the portal of death, the portal of the elements, and the portal of the sun. Those who wish to tread the entire path of knowledge must pass through all 3 portals. The portal of death has been described by all mystery teachings. It can be attained via meditation, that is, via complete surrender and devotion to certain thoughts or perceptions that we place at the center of our consciousness and identify with them wholly. Such requires repetition, constant repetition. After a time, these thoughts will gain an independent life. The thought becomes an inner structure. Oneself becomes the sheath of this thought. This awakening, this enlivening of the thought is significant for the meditator. She is then deeply stirred by the objective reality of the spiritual world. The spiritual world has approached her. Prior to this experience is a feeling of isolation, loneliness, of being forsaken by the physical world, necessary to grasp the spiritual world. But we must come through this feeling of isolation to be able to bear the inner animation to which the thought awakens, to which it is born. Much resistance now confronts the human. From within her there is much resistance to what leads to true perception of this inner awakening of the thought to life. One chooses involuntarily all sorts of evasions of what one must experience, that the thought which becomes enlivened becomes substantial. The thought takes on the form of a winged angel's head. One must actually achieve this. When one reaches this point, one is on the threshold of the spiritual world. But there, invisible to one, stands Ahriman, who hinders us from seeing the germinating thought being. One of Ahriman's temptations is the desire to import into the spiritual world concepts of the physical world, for instance, unity and multiplicity, are concepts that are of value only in the physical world. In the spiritual world, unity reveals itself as multiplicity. The possibility to stand before complete emptiness with a clean slate, allowing oneself to be guided only by enlivened thoughts. This entrance of the spiritual world is the gate of death, called so because it is an even greater death than the physical. To enter the spiritual world, we must lay aside our concepts, notions, and ideas, and allow our being to be built up anew. Now we confront the winged thought being. If we weaken, it is because we do not wish to lay bag and baggage aside. The whole soul, with everything it has acquired on the physical plane, must perish if it is to enter the spiritual world. The second portal is the portal of the elements, the second one to be passed through by those who give themselves up to zealous meditation. It is possible to reach the second portal without having passed through the first, but it is not good for real knowledge. The second portal shows itself in the following way. If one has passed through the portal of death, she feels herself to exist in certain conditions which resemble sleep, although inwardly they are different. As soon as the thought begins to live, the outer person begins to sleep. I have not been asleep, but I have been within the life of thought. Whereas in physical life, one is an ego, adding one thought to another. In that other state, one swims in one thought and then over to another. One is united with the thoughts. Then one is within a third and then swims away from it. One has the feeling that space no longer exists. The laws of space have ceased. We now actually live and weave within the thoughts themselves. The thoughts form themselves, and we, as the ego, are drawn along with them. This state must also cease. When we pass through the portal of the elements, then the whole process becomes subject to our will. Then we can follow a definite line of thought with intention. We then live in the whole life of thought with our will. This is a moment of tremendous significance, identifying ourselves with our destiny. One learns to act for oneself in the spiritual world by identifying oneself with one's destiny. This can only be achieved by degrees. Thoughts then acquire being, which is identical with our own. The deeds of our being enter the spiritual world. But in order to achieve this the right way, we must pass through the second portal. When with the power acquired from identifying ourselves with our destiny, we begin to weave in the thoughts in such a way that they do not carry one along as in a dream picture, but one is able to eliminate a thought and call up another, to manipulate them at will. When this begins, one experiences what may be called the passing through the portal. And then the power of will we are now using shows itself as a fearful monster, known as the encounter with the lion. In the life of feelings, this gives rise to a dreadful fear. A fear of what is taking place in the world of thought, of this living union with it, and this fear must be overcome. Just as the loneliness of the portal of death must be overcome. Now what occurs is that one finds the possibility of mastering this wild beast, this lion that meets us. The power of will which we want to use in the spiritual world threatens to devour us. Rather than surrendering to the fear that the elements of will in the spiritual world will seize, strangle, and devour us, we must swing ourselves to the back of the lion, grasp these elements of will, and make use of them for action. If one has first passed through the gate of death, one is outside the body and can only use the forces of will outside. One must insert oneself into the cosmic harmony. The forces that must be used outside the body are also within us, only they rule unconsciously. The forces that circulate our blood and make our hearts beat come from the spirituality into which we plunge when we immerse ourselves in the element of will. If one is taken possession by the element of will without having gone through the gate of death, she employs not the forces outside her but inside her. This is gray magic. She seizes the spiritual world with forces with which she is not permitted to use. If one does not approach the second portal, one always remains in danger of wanting to rule the world out of egotism. The pseudo-mystical method involves stupefying thought and stimulating emotions. One is thus devoured by the lion. It does with one as it pleases. Such is egotism. If we have not first passed through the gate of death, but go directly to the gate of the elements, we are prevented by Lucifer from really perceiving the lion. Thus it devours us. The third portal is the portal of the sun. At the portal of death, we perceive a winged angel head. At the portal of the elements, a lion. At the portal of the sun, we perceive a fierce dragon. Lucifer and Ahriman together try to make it imperceptible to our spiritual vision. If we do not perceive it, we realize that this dragon is woven out of ourselves, the instincts and sensations which relate to our lower nature, comprising all the forces of digestion and other things. We must contemplate him when he coils out of us. The dragon is far from beautiful, and it is therefore easy for Lucifer and Ahriman so to influence our subconscious life of soul that unconsciously we do not wish to see the dragon. Into the dragon are also woven all of our absurdities, vanities, pride, and self-seeking, basest instincts. It is called the portal of the sun because in the sun forces live those forces from which the dragon is woven. If we do not contemplate the dragon, he devours us, and we become one with him in the spiritual world. We are then no longer distinct from the dragon. We are the dragon who experiences in the spiritual world. The experiences one has at the portal of death are colorless, shadow-like, and so light and intimate they may escape us. Why we must always exert ourselves. It requires long and energetic striving before this world appears as reality. With color, sound, and life, the radiating forces must pour in from devotion. If we are one with the dragon, we shall be inclined, when we see an air or water spirit, to ray out the forces that are within us, in the organs, usually lower organs, belly clairvoyance, head clairvoyance. Clairvoyance that arises from the animation of thinking. If we do not consciously approach the portal of the sun, if we are not aware that we summon into the dragon what is contained in the etheric and astral body of the belly, then we radiate it forth into picture clairvoyance, and then we receive a truly wonderful world. The most beautiful and easiest of attainments is from belly clairvoyance. In this kind of clairvoyance also lies forces, which one must learn to use. The forces used in digestion are involved in a process of transformation, and we experience them in the right way when we learn more and more to cultivate the identification with destiny. The spiritual world exists as a reversal of everything experienced in the physical world. For instance, one streams with the light oneself into the spiritual world. In the spiritual world, one is oneself within the ray of light, and it is in this way that one touches an object. As soon as one knows that one is alive in the weaving of thoughts, then comes an immediate awareness of self, knowledge in the luminous streaming light, for thought is of the light, thought weaves in the light. The phenomenon of death is ever present to the soul which has passed through the gate of death. It is always present, yet it stands there as the most beautiful presence, as the awakener. Within the spiritual world, death is the most wonderful instructor. an instructor who can prove to the receptive soul that there is a spiritual world, because through its very being it destroys the physical, and from this destruction allows the spiritual to emerge. The resurrection of the spiritual, with the complete stripping off of the physical, is an event ever present between death and a new birth. A poem. Within the streaming light I feel the life force. Death has waked me from sleep, from spirit sleep. I shall live on and do out of myself what the power of light radiates into me. Spiritual science, this knowledge becomes so alive in us that we adopt another way of feeling with the world, of experiencing with the world, so that the idea of spiritual science begins to live in us, our contribution to the evolution of the world.